we're very honoured at Human Go collectively to have you as part of the team, Matt, with the combination of your understanding of what it means to be and aspire to be one of the best triathletes in the world, with the background and the physiology and the professional career that you've had, is an incredibly powerful combination that you bring to the team. Share some of your background and experience with that, with both yourself and your athletes.
Yeah, I'm one of the few, I guess, remaining pros that came through the age group rank. I didn't plan on this being my full-time career. So I was a professor of exercise science until, I guess, 2015. I was an amateur triathlete. Then I started moonlighting as a professional triathlete in 2014 and spent 2 years moonlighting, and then won a couple decent races and decided to step out of the classroom and go full-time into the sport. So I began my coaching business around that time. And yeah, I've really tried to use that education and that 8 years of schooling that I went and paid for to help build a coaching business, but also a lot of partnerships where I can use my education to provide value rather than, just be a media shill, I guess.
Talk about your journey as a pro athlete and some of your greatest achievements.
Yeah, my journey was a bit of an accident. I thought I had found a lifelong hobby when I came to the sport, and turned out that I was winning some races in it as an amateur, and then like, it'll be a little bit cheaper for me to go pro, and then I can race when it fits around my academic teaching schedule, and so I went pro, and then my first year as a pro, I won Ironman Chattanooga and as a rookie, and then came back in year 2 and won the first North American title, the Ironman North American Championships in Texas. And yeah, I've been able to win that race multiple times now, and that's the North American Champs has kind of been, I guess, where I made the bulk of my name. Is been peaking around that event. I finally figured out how to peak at the World Championships this last year. Had a decent race there finally, but so that's on the athlete side. It's been mostly long course and mostly getting off the bike with a little bit of work to do and running my way through the field.
And how about your professional career?
Yeah, I started undergrad was athletic training, and then I got a job as an athletic trainer while I was working on my master's and my doctorate. As soon as I finished that, I moved into a 10-year teaching track position, taking over the human performance program at Buena Vista University. And so I was trying to do a little bit of research while handling a heavy teaching load. I was the only full-time professor in the exercise science field, so I was teaching a lot more than I should have been. And the fun thing is the research that I was doing was leading to some white papers for some nutrition products, and I was doing some research with Normatec, which both of which helped me lead to long-term partnerships when I made the full-time switch. So I've been able to use some of the education side of things to really help not only the coaching but also the partnership aspect of things.
People who aren't used to, training on a structured training program are new to the whole concept of structure and periodization. What is testing?
There's a lot of different ways that we can go about testing, but in a nutshell, it's a method of developing a workout or a session that either a coach or that we're going to give this athlete in order to allow us to learn about what's under the hood with that athlete, what the physiological things that we are looking at, whether it's a heart rate test, a power test, a speed test. There's a number of different ways that you can go about testing. There's, what's the saying? There's more than one way to skin a cat. But it's a way to just show where the body is at, how much progress you've made perhaps, or a starting point perhaps, but it's a way to give us the best snapshot of where your current fitness is, or where your current zones would lie.
Matt, you've got a lot of experience with testing in the endurance sports world. Really big question to start is, who needs to test?
I mean, that's really a quite easy one to answer. Everybody needs to do some level of testing at some stage, and really probably some level of testing at some stage of that year, because the numbers are going to constantly be changing. And whether you're self-guiding your training, working with Hugo guiding your training, or working with a coach guiding your training, the only way that training is as efficient as possible is if we have accurate numbers, and those numbers are going to change probably quite a bit more frequently than you think. And yeah, so the amount of testing that you'll have to be doing is different for the individual. The number of times you need to test, and the best time is going to be different for everybody, but everybody needs to have some level of testing to just know that they can build an efficient training program, because that's what we want to do, right? We want to use our limited time that we have training as efficiently as possible.
I guess one of the biggest questions and the most commonly asked questions from our users is, how regularly should I test? It can get a little confusing.
There's a lot of factors that go into it, and a lot of it is determined by what type of test that you're going to do. If we think about it in terms of bike testing, a 20-minute test can be quite fatiguing, and you have to be very fresh in order for it to mean anything. So you have to taper in, and then you have to recover. So that 20-minute test could mean a week of training. So you don't want to be testing every 6 weeks, because then you're losing over a month of training time throughout the course of a year if you're over testing, and you're not really giving your body enough time to adapt to that test. So you want to be intelligent about how often and when you're testing. Early in your training journey, or if you're young in the sport, you might have to test a little bit more frequently, because you're going to make improvements really, really quickly. I've been doing this a long time, and so there's not a lot of changes that happen. So for me, testing is maybe a month into a season, and maybe that's it, because I'm going to race from March till December. So it really is determined by the individual, and that's where there's value of having somebody in your corner that's going to help you determine when the best times to test are.
Right, great. So dependent on the level of athlete and where you are in your training cycle, you want to go into your testing phase, or test well rested and give yourself enough leeway to recover.
And then you might, if you're doing a bike specific block where you're really trying to hit sweet spot a lot, then it might make sense to come out of that and test in that zone, or get a test that kind of that you've just taught to, right? We don't want to test if we haven't really talked to the test. I learned that in my college professor days, that kind of irritates students. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways. I might, with the athletes that I'm working with, we might do a top end block and then end that with a test of their top end. So we're not looking to develop their complete profile. We're just looking to see how well did we develop that top end.
How would you suggest somebody who is perhaps training swim, bike and run then, who wants to measure their physiology in all of 3 disciplines, apply their testing in a periodized way to get the most out of that testing as a baseline?
Yeah, tough question. The tradition, I guess, that was became popular after the Triathlon Training Bible was written is you do a test, and then you multiply that test by a magic number, and that gives you all of your zones, and that puts every single athlete in the exact same box. And we know that really that doesn't work that way. That if we took that into running, that would mean the fastest 100-meter dash runner would also be the fastest 10K runner and also the fastest marathon runner. And, that hasn't happened yet. So we shouldn't be doing that. I mean, that's an averages way of coaching, or an averages way. We really want to develop your individualized zones. And for some people, they're a little bit more like a diesel engine, where they may not have a huge FTP or a huge threshold, but they can hold a high percent of that threshold for a long period of time. And then we have others that are going to be more like a stock car, where their threshold is much higher, but if you try to have them hold 80% of that for an hour or for 2 hours, they're going to explode, right? So we've got to figure out how you are as an individual and make your unique zones. And that allows us to, again, coach you a lot more efficiently. And if we develop our tests or testing procedures that allow us to build a full athlete profile, we can find out where we can spend the time as a coach training you specifically, or where the biggest gaps or the biggest juices left to squeeze, or, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak.
Right, so making the connection between the result of the test, the customized training zones, and the requirements or the performance demands on race day or come event day. That making that connection. Definitely.
And we really want to look at a well-developed athlete. We don't want to just hit one single zone. And by doing a test that gives us an idea of where all of our zones are, it can kind of, I always kind of look at it like a guitar. We want to tune every single string of the guitar, otherwise it's not going to sound good. And so we want to hit all the zones in order to make the athlete perform well. And if we're testing, we can really find out what strings we need to tune the most.
How do I know? How does any of our users know when the right time to test is?
Yeah, so we definitely need to have a starting point. I definitely don't recommend on day one of a training program you do a 20-minute max out test. That wouldn't be a good use of your time. You're not prepared for that. But once we get into the swing of things, then you'd want to test anytime that you start to see heart rate and power starting to separate again. So if you're normally at 200 watts and 150 beats per minute, and all of a sudden you've done 3 or 4 workouts where you're at 200 watts and 140 or 145 beats per minute, that's a good suggestion that you've had some fitness adaptations. And so maybe it's starting to, your efficiency factor has gone up. So maybe that's a good time to see if we need to adjust the zones. Anytime that we finished a key block of training that was meant to increase our race pace or increase our sweet, whatever it was, that could be a good time to test as well. On the flip side, if we're really struggling to hold certain numbers or to hit our workouts, that could also be another good time. And that, even if we back our numbers down a little bit, that doesn't necessarily mean that our training isn't working well, especially as triathletes. And now, if I was a single sport and all of a sudden I'm backing my, if I'm a cyclist and all of a sudden I have to back my cycling powers down, that would be a red flag. But if I'm doing a huge run push, it would be asinine for me not to expect that to take a little bit out of my swim times or a little bit off the run legs. And so having a non-fatiguing test that can help us make sure that our zones are okay, so we can really focus on the run. Our bike zones might have to come down a little bit. So that could be another time as well.
That's a really good point, isn't it? I think is athletes, training consistently with a goal in mind, where our aspiration can often be to continue to improve all of our sports in the multi-sport world. And that, as you point out, is not always the case. So giving ourselves a bit of grace when we understand that we're shifting the priority to sport and maybe even training zone, that other things will suffer as a result, is a very reasonable, approach.
Definitely. And I think there's a bit of a misconception. There's always a lot of stress that comes along with all-out max testing, because we're type A athletes and we want to nail it every time and we always want our best numbers. But if we're training for a long course triathlon, for example, and we're in our race specific phase and we're adding a lot of fatigue to the system, that wouldn't be the time where I would expect the best 20-minute numbers. And I would kind of quit if we saw the best 20-minute test ever in a high fatigue race prep phase. I would question what I'm doing as a coach sometimes, because that might not be the case, right? And so it's just kind of having somebody to understand those scenarios and talk through things surrounding the tests can also be very valuable.
On the, I guess, the human side of things, though, what things negatively and positively can impact a test result for any one athlete showing up on any one day?
Yeah, it's always tough. We put a lot of emphasis on that one day, and if we didn't sleep well the night before, if we had a stressful day at work, like, we're living being humans and we're all impacted by everything that goes on. And for most of you watching this, this is a hobby, and so it can be all consuming at times, but we just need to take a step back sometimes and remember that this is just a snapshot of today. And if your kids were up all night on a night that you're supposed to, and you're supposed to do a test in the morning, that could be a good idea to swap that with another one, right? Or a different day, or if sometimes it could come down to just like timing your coffee or your caffeine intake, right? Or your sugar intake, especially when you're going for that 12-minute one. That's a good way to zap your blood sugar. And there's also an element of pacing and learning how to take the test. And a lot of times as the test gets longer and longer, a 12-minute test or longer, if you go out a little bit too hot, you're going to probably fizzle towards the end, and that might not lead to the best result, but that could just show that you didn't take the test well that day, not that you're not gaining in fitness.
Yeah, one of the things that I experience often is with athletes, they'll do one test and they just said, I did my 20-minute all out, and after 12 minutes I was just, my power halved and I couldn't keep going, and they feel like it's a failure.
Yeah.
Again, with that reflection, understanding that it's day one, maybe the first time you've ever done that, and next time you'll have learned something from this first experience and you'll be applying that learning to the next time.
Definitely.
It's really valuable.
Yeah, and knowing that you get better and better at taking a test the more that you test.
Yeah, and the research shows that, right? It's the same as doing any interval on the track, running, or a climb on the bike outside. Every time you do that, you get better at pacing and holding your pace for the duration. So there's lots of testing protocol out there. Human Go offers different sub and max testing. How does an athlete know what the right test for them is?
Yeah, hopefully, if you're self-guiding, then knowing your experience level, I think, is important. If you're brand new to cycling, for example, jumping right into the old traditional 20-minute test is probably going to be a tough experience, and it's not going to give you really valuable information straight out of the gate if that's all that you're doing, because you just don't have the experience of knowing exactly, you're trying to thread a needle, go as hard as you can without going too hard early on, and so that can lead to a lot of invalid results. But if you're younger in the sport, or don't have a ton of experience, then testing over multiple different time frames is really valuable, because that's going to tell you a lot about who you are as an individual, and probably provide, even if you're more experienced, it's going to provide better insight into how your zones are developed or how you physiologically are made up, because we're all a little bit different. And so Yeah, I mean, I might use the traditional 20-minute test with some of my athletes, but if I do, I'm still doing a shorter one, like a sprint test, 30 seconds, a 3-minute test, a 12-minute test, and then I usually don't go beyond 20. But I'll do that to try to build out get a full spectrum picture of the athlete. We're still fighting a lot of the traditions of the past, and one of those is around testing, and we've come a long way in our understanding of the best ways to go about it. There's always a lot of stresses that come with a test day, and being able to help our athletes understand that we're not just looking for one data point to set your training for the next year, or the next block even. We're really looking for multiple data points and multiple different tests in different zones or different power profiles or speed profiles that are going to help us understand where you're at today. And even if you don't have your best 30-second power ever on today's 30-second effort, it's going to show us where you're at right now and help us set things up for you specifically, whether it's Hugo or whether it's somebody else helping guide Hugo with Human Go. It's going to just give them a snapshot of where things are at for you right now. And so, yeah, I think our job is to help athletes understand that it's not pass fail. We're kind of ingrained through our whole schooling situation. It's just, this is where we're at right now.
Yeah, and understanding that on any one day, an athlete might feel absolutely fantastic and show up to their test thinking that I'm going to absolutely, crush this, versus, oh, I'm a little bit off today. I don't really want to do my testing, but this is when I scheduled it. I'm going to do it anyway. Yep. The research suggests that there's actually not a lot of differentiation between the results of somebody who does feel absolutely fantastic today versus someone who's maybe off their A game a little bit. But really create an opportunity to manage that and compare that to a race day experience. So you can you can in fact leverage that experience for the athlete and start to simulate the psychology of a race day. Yep. And address that without actually having to rock up to a race.
Yeah, I mean, and it could be a good opportunity to practice like your pre-race meal and all those things, especially if you're going to test in the morning. Why not use that as an event? Like, we want you to perform at 7 a.m. That's what time you're going to have to perform on the race day. So let's treat the 2 days leading up to it very similar to how we would for a race.
How does a Human Go user actually leverage the test results to optimize their training?
Hugo kind of does the work for you. Once it has the best numbers for you that we have currently available. So if you just did a test, then it's using the most recent update picture of who you are right now. It'll adjust everything and really go to set a training program for your goal race based on this snapshot that you just gave it.
Yeah, perfect. And then anytime the athlete has a new test or Hugo even identifies a new data set within the training, then there's another opportunity to update that, the TPO, the TPA for any given sport, and have that derived directly into the training plan. One of the common questions that we also have from our users is, how do I monitor the data and how do I make sense of it in training? And I understand that's a big question. So if you want to break that down, totally fine to do that, Matt.
Yeah. Monitoring the data is, we have two sides of that. We have the qualitative and the quantitative. We're type A triathletes, so we like the quantitative much better. But when you go to monitor that, you're looking for changes in, hopefully we're able to give multiple data points per training session. So heart rate and power, or pace and power, for example, or pace and heart rate, sorry, on running. And so what we're looking for is changes in that. And that's where we're going to see the adaptation is when we're going at the same pace with lower heart rate, or faster pace with the same heart rate, or lower, same power with lower heart rate. Those are the changes that we're looking for. And we don't want to look at and just rely on one session. And we definitely don't want to freak out if, one session our heart rate is a little bit higher than it normally was. We're not looking for changes over one session. We're looking for the general trend of those changes to see some adaptation. And then we can also look at the overall graphs that kind of show fitness, and as long as the graph is going up, we can trust that we're getting a little bit more fit.
If that in fact is the objective, is interesting coming into the end of the year last year and start of the year this year, people are commenting, I'm seeing my fitness drop, I'm seeing my my readiness drop. There's a clear reason for that, and just acknowledging where the athlete is in the season is quite critical in that.
Yeah, and we're going to see that, especially if our A goal was a full distance race. And like for myself, I did Kona as my A goal, and then I had 70.3 worlds after that. Well, it would be really impossible to prep for a 70.3 world and have the overall fitness keep going up after doing a full distance race, because we want to hit a lot of higher intensity work going into a 70.3 and longer intervals at a lower intensity for a full. And that the higher intensity, shorter workouts are going to be lower overall, give the overall training stress score. And so it should go down, and being comfortable with that. Just because that fitness number is at its all-time high doesn't mean that you're at the all-time readiness to race.
Yeah, making sure that you're not panicking and freaking out if you're seseeing that number drop, understanding the big picture for sure.
And being willing to let that drop at the end of the season, like you mentioned. A lot of athletes use that as a metric of, I just have to keep it at this level. But that's how we plateau, is if we don't let it come down, we can't, we want to let it come down and then make it grow a little bit higher, and then let it come down and then make it grow a little bit higher over the course of the year or multiple years. And if we don't, it's going to be harder to see, overall gains, although, we just see flat performances.
There's a fascination, I guess, for particularly new athletes or people who haven't, or even have used the traditional percentage of max heart rate, to establish training zones, moving from a little bit more guesswork to precision testing. Matt, in your experience, is there an aha moment there for athletes starting to make that connection back to the specifics of their training versus, the guesswork that they were maybe following along previous to that?
Yeah, I think the aha moment usually comes in the more experienced athletes. The younger athletes in the sport, if they're working with somebody, they'll just do whatever that they say that you say is right. But with triathlon especially, we're a younger sport, and we're still compared to straight cycling or straight running or straight swimming, and so we're still developing the best way to train triathletes. And in the past, it's been training triathletes like cyclists, marathon runners, and swimmers or distance swimmers. And there's a lot of tradition surrounding that. And so I think the aha moment is when we realize that, this one test that was talked about, 30 years ago or 25 years ago, for a lot of people is going to result in zones that really don't match their physiology. If I've mentioned people who have a really high developed top end, if they take this 20-minute test on the bike, that's kind of the traditional test, and that's all they do. And we, just do the math that was suggested 30 years ago to build out your zones. Then if you're going to be training in the bulk of your time spent training in your lower zones are probably going to be too high if you're that athlete that has high physiology. From an ego perspective, it's tough to accept that, hey, I've got to take a step back, and I'm causing way too much fatigue, and instead of being in zone 2, I'm in this gray zone where it's not an efficient way of training. It's the most fatigue for the least stimulus. And, so I've got to be willing to take this step back. And once they buy into that, all of a sudden they see everything else start to click, and all these gains that they haven't seen in a long time start to move forward.
That's a really exciting time for athletes, huh?
That's what we're looking for. And that's an exciting time for coaches as well. Like, we talked about the plateau earlier. Anytime, that's a frustrating time for athletes, but it's a frustrating time if a coach is working with an athlete who's plateaued as well. So when you can get that buy-in and, get them to really dial in their zones, and then trust that the zones where, okay, maybe the lower end of their training, or the time when they're going to spend most of their training, is less, but that allows them to push the intervals that, the high end intervals even more, because they're not so fatigued, that's a fun time.
Yeah, breaking through that glass ceiling, that plateau barrier, is a really
Correct.
exciting time for athletes and coaches. Right, so in light of things becoming exciting for both athletes and coaches as they become more focused on that concept of personalized training zones, let's have a look at what it takes to add a Hugo recalibration assessment to your training plan, and to implement it, and to get those customized training zones as a result.
You'll head over to your plan screen, and on the bottom right hand corner you'll see the dark purple icon for extra actions. Under that list, you're going to assess your performance. You can choose running or cycling from here. Select the Hugo recalibration assessment. The protocol can be 1 day or 2 days. You can tell Hugo what format you would like to take there. The 1 day incorporates all 3 max tests in one session. The 2 day spreads it out across 2 days. Hugo will then list a range of dates where that is appropriate based on your periodization and your fatigue levels as to when that is best added to your program, or you can select a custom date if you would like to get very specific with that. Once you set the date, you can confirm, and Hugo will go to work adding that to your schedule so that you can get your customized training zones. Have fun with it.